The training today is for the mobile devices policy, which went into effect January of 2017. What we're here today, the objective of today's meeting is to address the new policy. We will spend some time discussing safety, best practices, responsibilities, and perception. Whether you're using a city-provided device or if you're going to embrace personally owned mobile devices, or what we sometimes refer to as BYOD. Minnetonka is giving employees that option, but that's at the discretion of the director. The director must approve that choice. So if you are listening to this, you must be working with your direct supervisor and director for approval. So often these days, more and more, we're finding that mobile devices are becoming not a luxury, but a necessity. So we as a city have embraced that and have made that part of our everyday technology world. So the city understands that some employees may desire to only carry one device. In the case of a phone, many employees also have tablets or many times an iPad. And we want to offer employees both options, city-owned and or BYOD. The training that you're getting today is because you've been identified as an employee that will be using some form of mobile device, and it has been approved by your direct supervisor and director. So it's important to note that for some people, they have been interested in syncing their personal device because they want access to their email. Just as a reminder, you can also review off-site through the web on what we refer to as the Outlook Web Access, or sometimes we refer to it as OWA. So we have some information out on Insight under the IT subfolder with instructions on how to use the OWA function, as opposed to if you have been unable to access or sync your mobile device directly to your email. Mobile devices, again, the purpose of this training is to make sure that all employees are fully aware of city-provided policies as well as responsibilities when using a BYOD device. So as an example, if it's been approved for business purposes, but you elect or prefer to only carry one device, you should be aware of the following. There is a full mobile device policy, but then there's also a waiver of liability that needs to be filled out by you and your supervisor, and we'll discuss that a little bit farther down in the presentation. Utilizing your personal equipment is voluntary. It isn't not a requirement by the part of the city. It must be, if you choose, you and your supervisor approve this, must be available for use during employee hours and all established on-call times, and make sure that you're providing good regular backups on your device. If you're using a city-provided device, again, available for use during employees' hours and all established on-call, take measures to prevent any unauthorized persons from gaining access to the device. Return the device upon departure from employment with the city, and then make sure that you're following individual department protocol for the assigned device. Some just FAQ kind of stuff. Did you know? All mobile devices will require a minimal, at least a 6-digit PIN. For those of you who are listening to this and already had a device, we used to have a 4-digit requirement, and that has now been changed to 6 digits. It can be longer than that. It just can't be any shorter than 6 digits. If you incorrectly type your PIN 8 consecutive times, the mobile software that the IT department uses, referred to as the MDM, will automatically wipe the device. So be very careful. And what I mean by that is there's a pause, and you'll see that later here in the slide. 1 to 3 consecutive incorrect failure attempts will lock the device for 5 minutes. The fourth time, 15. 5 to 7 will be 60 minutes. And then sadly, if you hit the eighth consecutive time, it will wipe the device altogether. So please be aware of that and be very, very careful. The other thing that the IT department will do is turn on the location services. Apple is collecting information from nearby towers. It's that Wi-Fi access point will also then make sure that it always knows where you currently are, which is to your advantage. And we are not turning that location services on because we're paying attention to where you're located. We're doing it for your purposes as a benefit so that you can take advantage of some of the features within the device. It's also a responsibility of the employee, whether it's a BYOD device or a city-owned device, when there are updates for the iPad or the iPhone. So please be timely about those updates. What we usually recommend is when you get the notification to do that within 24 hours, unless you hear from IT staff differently that they'd like you to wait. We are a hands-free city. We have embraced that for purposes of security and safety. The slide that you're looking at right now is showing you the hands-free equipment that we are using. If you're using a city vehicle, typically it will have Bluetooth enabled. If it's an older vehicle, it may not, and then we require for business purposes that you use this hand-free equipment. That equipment, if you open up a help desk ticket with IT, they will provide that equipment for you at no charge. This is something that IT has budgeted for and will provide that so that we don't have some with the devices and some without. So again, work with your supervisor. Again, you want to make sure that if you are in a vehicle, is it really necessary for you to be speaking on the phone, or is it something where you could wait until you're back in the office?
Safety is a primary concern for the city, for all of its employees, and this slide just provides some useful reminders about what the impacts are of distraction while driving. The studies have shown that adults text and drive as well as teens. It is not a teen-related phenomenon. And the distraction of responding to text on or even using voice commands on your phone can last up to 27 seconds. So you want to avoid making or receiving calls as much as possible, because even when it's allowed by the law, it can be distracting. We want to review some of the legal requirements for driving and the use of mobile devices while driving, and those rules differ depending upon the nature of your job. So for employees who are in public safety, the law does allow police and fire personnel to use their mobile devices while performing official duties. It's still required that applicable traffic and licensing laws be followed for the police, that you're complying with your post-board licensing, and you should avoid, whenever possible, using a mobile device to compose or send an electronic message while driving, again, because of the safety factor. Employees shouldn't make or receive phone calls while driving under any circumstance that would violate the traffic laws, and whenever possible, safely pull over to the side of the road to access or retrieve data. We want to remind employees that if there are traffic violations resulting from use of city-issued or personal mobile devices, those traffic violations are the responsibility of the employee to pay. Now, for the commercial driver's license employees, this slide is directed at that. Again, the rules are very similar to those with police and fire, although you don't have the ability you don't have that exemption that allows you to use mobile devices while driving. And in fact, the commercial driver's license rules are strict, and that bar over at the side is what you really should remember off of this slide. The new commercial driver's license rules are easy to follow. It's just no reaching for the phone, no holding the phone while driving, no dialing, no texting, no reading the phone. It's pretty simple. For those of employees who are not CDL or public safety and are within the general services category, these are the rules that apply to every driver in the state of Minnesota, and you need to be following those. Follow all applicable traffic and licensing laws. Do not use a mobile device to compose or send an electronic message. Even using voice command is not allowed under the law. You shouldn't make or receive any phone calls under any circumstances that would violate traffic laws. So for example, when you're driving on icy conditions, making phone calls could amount to careless driving. You need to be sure that you're following traffic laws. Use hands-free technology whenever it's available, and pull over to the side of the road if you're going to be accessing or retrieving any data. Again, any traffic violations resulting from use of a mobile device are the responsibility of the employee. When you're using mobile devices, you need to understand that all data that is connected with official city business is subject to the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. That means that if the information was created, received, or stored on any city network, it is owned by the city. It is subject to the act. It is possible, if you have a mobile device and you are using that device for work purposes, whether it's your own personal device or a city-issued device, if there were a lawsuit, it is possible that there could be a request to access data that's on your telephone, if that's relevant to the lawsuit. And it may be necessary for the city to have you turn over your phone for that purpose. For those employees who are using personal devices, the city is not going to issue a temporary device if your personal device is placed on a litigation hold. That's one of the competing benefits of only carrying one phone, but the city won't issue a temporary device if your phone is required for litigation. All of the required software applications that are purchased and installed by the staff have to remain on the phone, the personal device, while it's being used for the work purposes. And that includes the 6-digit PIN passcode, the location services, and the management device management agent. And you need to make sure that you're keeping your software up to date.
The next section section we will get into is the Fair Labor Standards Act, also known as FLSA considerations. The basis for the FLSA considerations is anything you do working outside your normal working hours needs to be on the clock and paid time. There's nothing an employee can do work-related off the clock. For non-exempt employees, also known as hourly employees, any emails or text communications outside of the scheduled work hours needs to be reported and needs to be recorded. Any work performed remotely Outside of the scheduled work hours is also considered work time. Any time spent checking emails or other messages as required by the employer is also time worked. There's no differentiation between the use of phone, computer, or web access. The employer supervisor must also approve any overtime hours in advance. Hourly employees should also inform their supervisor of any hours they are also working or tasks they are doing outside of the normal work schedule, so those hours can be reported properly. And supervisors should watch and account for all hours performed. So I guess to sum it up, the basis for the FLSA considerations is anything you do work-related, those hours need to be reported regardless of if it's from a phone, a computer, or any web access-based device.
With very few exceptions, for those employees who use their own devices, we will be issuing electronic allowances, and no longer will we be doing any reimbursements for those costs. So there are a few exceptions where their primary job is related to technology. Those will be reimbursed, but all others, we will be providing an electronic allowance through people's payrolls. A payroll allowance for employee costs related to use of personal equipment will only be provided when they're explicitly authorized by a department director. You must work with your supervisor, and your supervisor then works with the department director. The rates will be determined regularly by the finance manager as authorized by the city manager. And you'll note that those rates for that or that electronic allowance only cover a portion of internet or data or a phone plan, in recognition of the fact that much of that use of both of those will also be personal. It'll be very few cases when a person will get both an internet allowance for home use as well as a mobile plan allowance. The reason we term this as an electronic allowance is that because in most cases a portion or all of it will be taxable, so it will look like income and be reported to the IRS as part of your income. And we'll note that allowance is meant for employees that opt to use the bring your own device instead of a city issued device. So the reality is in most cases the fact that there is a business reason in which that person needs that access has already been determined. And in many cases, most people just will have a device assigned to them that is city-owned. In those few cases where people choose to have just one device, in those cases, they would receive an electronic allowance for use of their own device. The process for doing this requires that your supervisor your supervisor work with your director to fill out a form that is available on Insight, and in that it provides that there are 3 different forms that an employee must read and sign in order to, and a director must read and sign in order for a person to have their own device. This form shows that the 3 different waivers and forms are in fact signed. They are then routed through Pat Schroep in admin, who then will make sure that all of those, that IT is then informed and that all of the correct forms have been filled out. In general, the workflow is that determination by your supervisor is made, a department director reviews and approves the request and submits an IT ticket through using this form. That form is then turned in electronically only from the department director to Pat Schroep. So there are 3 forms you'll notice on that are required to be looked at. That's the device and training waiver, as well as the request for the acknowledgement of mobile device policy form and the waiver of liability. It's important to note that if this is authorized, that payroll requires 2 payroll periods later in order to have this begin to be effective and receive that allowance in your payroll check. You'll note that if your own device replaces a city-issued device, IT has to be notified to ensure that there's not a double billing going on in someone's budget.
We thought it was also appropriate at this time to remind employees of non-policy items which are more related to etiquette tips. Some of this I know seems like common sense, but it's just a good time to be reminded. Give 100% focus to the person in front of you. So when you have any type of mobile device, iPhones, iPads, laptops, Don't interrupt a face-to-face conversation with someone, including in the hallway or in the employee lunchroom as an example. By taking a call or texting, the question to ask yourself is, what impression am I making when my attention is diverted to my phone? So just be mindful of that. If you are bringing mobile devices in meetings, avoid reading, as we refer to reading under the table. Most people know to turn their phones to silent in meetings, but this is a good reminder. However, it is not the occasional phone ringing that is so annoying, although that also is a problem, but also not paying attention during the meeting and reading under the table is also not a good practice. Whenever possible, my suggestion is that you leave your mobile devices in your office while attending meetings, if that's at all possible. Have a professional ringtone. As an example, whether it's a BYOD device or a city-issued phone, it's your responsibility to make sure that you are, as representing the city, always using the most professional ringtone for that coverage. As we said earlier, turn your mobile device to silent to avoid annoying and distractions when you're in a public place or in a meeting. Take personal calls in a private place. Hearing someone talking loudly on a cell phone can be very distracting, so be mindful of that. And then just another good reminder to let your friends and family know that you may not be available to take your call or calls while at the office. Again, just in closing, on the mobile devices policy, as Meryl mentioned, we've got the mobile device policy, so you need to sign that particular policy. If you're going to be embracing and have been given authorization from your director to use BYOD devices for business, there's also what's referred to as a waiver of liability form that needs to be signed by both you, the employee, and your director. And then if there's going to be reimbursement, there's also the employee electronic allowance that needs to also be signed. In closing, if you have any questions whatsoever after reviewing this audio recording, please refer to your supervisor, and then they will take those questions, either whether they are legal, financial, HR, or IT. Thank you.